Ukraine's security service has once again demonstrated that no corner of occupied Ukrainian territory is truly safe for the personnel Moscow has stationed there, this time striking deep into the temporarily occupied part of Kherson region, with a coordinated drone operation aimed squarely at a facility the SBU says functioned as an FSB coordination center. According to the agency's own statements, the target was not a hardened military base in the conventional sense, but a former resort complex, repurposed by Russian security services into a command and control node, from which intelligence officers directed operations against Ukrainian forces and civilians alike. The choice of a resort complex as a cover location is itself worth pausing on, because it fits a pattern that has emerged repeatedly throughout this war. Occupying forces converting civilian infrastructure, holiday facilities, sanatoriums, and administrative buildings into military and intelligence assets, calculating that the change in function would either go unnoticed or would complicate Ukrainian targeting decisions. That calculation, in this case, appears to have failed. The scale of what the SBU says it found and struck is significant. Preliminary assessments put the number of personnel at the site at around 100, a figure that, if accurate, would represent a meaningful concentration of FSB-linked manpower in one location. This is not a small forward observation post or a temporary checkpoint manned by a handful of soldiers. A facility housing that many people, particularly people tied to Russia's principal security and intelligence service, indicates a location the Russians considered a durable, semi-permanent installation rather than a fleeting outpost. The presence of more than 70 vehicles reinforces that picture. Vehicle fleets on that scale suggest not just personnel transport, but logistics, supply runs, and possibly liaison functions connecting the site to other military and intelligence positions throughout the region. A facility that requires 70-plus vehicles to function is a facility that has become a hub, a place other units and officials would have needed to pass through or coordinate with regularly. Then there's the defensive posture the SBU describes. Armed guards, multiple checkpoints, engineering fortifications, and underground shelters. Taken together, these details tell a story of a site the Russians understood to be a high-value target and tried to harden accordingly. Underground shelters in particular point to an awareness that Ukrainian long-range strikes, drone attacks, and precision munitions have become a persistent threat to any fixed Russian position, especially ones tied to intelligence and command functions. The fact that the Russians invested in fortifications and layered checkpoints suggests this was treated as a protected asset, something they expected might eventually draw Ukrainian attention and wanted to be prepared for. That preparation, according to the SBU's account, still was not enough. 13 drones were reportedly used in the operation, a number that speaks to a deliberate, multi-angle approach rather than a single symbolic strike. Coordinating over a dozen unmanned systems against one target complex requires planning, reconnaissance, and precise sequencing, likely aimed at overwhelming point defense capabilities, striking multiple structures or vehicle clusters simultaneously, and reducing the chance that any part of the facility could escape damage by dispersing personnel or equipment. This kind of saturation approach has become something of a signature for Ukrainian special operations and intelligence-directed strikes over the past year, reflecting lessons learned about how to defeat point air defenses and how to maximize the destructive effect of a single operation against a target that might not present itself again. The result, per the SBU, was a large fire at the site, which is consistent with successful hits against vehicles, fuel stores, or ammunition, and which would also serve as visible confirmation, both to Ukrainian planners and to a global audience watching the war unfold in real time, that the strike achieved its purpose. The release of video footage showing what are described as precision strikes on the facility fits into a broader pattern in this conflict, where footage is not simply a byproduct of the operation, but a component of the operation's strategic value. For Ukraine, publicizing footage of a successful strike against an FSB-linked facility serves several purposes simultaneously. It demonstrates operational capability to both domestic and international audiences, reassuring Ukrainians that their security services remain capable of striking meaningfully at Russian assets even deep in occupied territory. It sends a signal to Russian personnel stationed in similar facilities that their locations are neither secret nor safe, potentially degrading morale and complicating Russia's ability to recruit or retain officers willing to serve in exposed, occupied areas. And it provides evidence, however preliminary, that can shape the broader narrative of the war, showing that Ukraine continues to hold initiative in certain domains even as the broader front lines have remained largely static for extended periods. It's also worth placing this operation within the wider context of how Ukraine's security services have approached the war against Russian intelligence infrastructure specifically. The FSB, unlike purely military formations, plays a distinct and in many ways more insidious role in occupied territories. Its officers are typically responsible for filtration operations, the identification and detention of Ukrainians suspected of resistance activity, the running of informant networks, and the broader project of consolidating Russian control over civilian populations through coercion, surveillance, and intimidation. Striking a facility that served as a coordination hub for such activity is not merely a tactical military action. It carries a symbolic and operational weight beyond simple troop or equipment attrition. If the site truly functioned as described, disrupting it could degrade Russia's ability to manage informant networks, conduct filtration processing, and maintain the administrative machinery of occupation in that part of Kherson region, at least temporarily. That said, some caution is warranted, as it always should be with wartime claims from any belligerent. The SBU's numbers, the casualty estimates, the personnel count, the vehicle count, are described as preliminary assessments. An independent verification of on-the-ground effects in occupied territory is extremely difficult to obtain. Russian authorities have not, at least publicly and immediately, corroborated or offered a competing account of the incident, which is itself unsurprising given how rarely Moscow acknowledges losses in occupied areas in real time. Analysts examining these kinds of claims typically look for secondary indicators, satellite imagery showing burn scars or structural damage, geolocated video analysis confirming the location and scale of the fire, and any subsequent Russian military or administrative changes in the area that might suggest a genuine disruption occurred. Until such corroboration surfaces, the operational details should be treated as Ukraine's official account rather than a fully independently confirmed record. Still, even accounting for that caveat, the operation fits a well-established and increasingly confident pattern in Ukraine's approach to asymmetric strikes against Russian assets in occupied territory. Ukrainian special services have, over the past year in particular, demonstrated a growing willingness and capability to conduct complex multi-drone operations against high-value, well-defended targets, rather than limiting themselves to more easily accessible frontline positions. This reflects both improved intelligence gathering, likely including human sources and signals intelligence that can pinpoint exactly where such coordination centers are located, and improved drone technology and tactics that allow for saturation strikes capable of penetrating layered defenses, including armed guards and checkpoints that would have deterred less sophisticated attacks. For the people living under occupation in that part of Kherson region, operations like this one carry a dual significance. On one hand, they represent evidence that Ukraine has not forgotten them and continues to actively target the apparatus of occupation. On the other, they raise the specter of Russian retaliation, as occupying authorities have historically responded to such strikes with intensified security measures, more aggressive filtration campaigns, and harsher treatment of local populations suspected of assisting Ukrainian intelligence. The tension between the tactical value of these strikes and their potential humanitarian consequences for civilians remains one of the more difficult and underdiscussed dimensions of this stage of the war, and it's a dimension worth keeping in mind, even as the more immediate story here is one of a bold, technically ambitious Ukrainian special operation against a significant Russian security asset.